Hello, I'm Liselle Sambury. I am a traditionally published author, and welcome to this video all about how much do I actually write as a full-time author. I think this is interesting, and I'm excited to look at this because I realized that because of the way that I track my writing on my Google Calendar, it's actually really easy for me to look back and see how much time I spent on each project or on different things. And I thought it would be fun to explore that. For one, for curiosity's sake, I just think those sorts of things are interesting. But for another, I think that, when I became a full-time author, I guess I would think that I would do more writing in general. And so I'm kind of curious to see how that goes. And I hope that it will be interesting for you as an audience to kind of see how much time that I actually spend on writing and working on books as opposed to other time. But I'm not going to be using this as like a try and beat myself. Like if I wrote for 100 days out of the year, next year I want to write for 200 or anything like that. I really do not care to do that. To me, projects take the time that they take, and I allot them their time based on that. And how I feel about wanting to work on projects, that's kind of my, not philosophy, but that's kind of my style. And to me, when I became a full-time author, it wasn't my thought that now I'll work on writing 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And I do follow a loose 9 to 5, Monday to Friday schedule. But to me, my desire is really to work 10 to 2. And then have a lot of chunks of time where I take a week or a couple weeks off. I guess in my ideal world, to me, writing would feel like a part-time job, and the rest of my life would be the rest of the part-time. That's kind of my feeling, and I guess, yes, philosophy about working in general. I guess I've always felt that work should be half of your life, even when you enjoy it. And then the other half of your life is leisure and doing whatever you want. I read, I watch TV, I do my little craft things. And to me, that's an ideal life. So I'm not actually out here trying to write 365 days of the year or anything like that. But yeah, I think it will be interesting to see what these numbers are and see how things work together. So how I'm going to structure this video, I will have timestamps so you can jump around if you want. So essentially I'm going to do a time tracking by project. So I'm going to talk about the time I spent over the year on each project, how many days. And then I'll show you all the projects together if you want to see that breakdown. And then I will also talk a bit about the time that I spent doing things like events and mentorships and other author adjacent activities, because I also think it'll be interesting to see that as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Hopefully I have moved over enough. So I'm actually going to show you a little graph thingy over here for each project. And it'll show the amount of days I spent working on a project each month. I'm going to go in order of when I started working on projects. And as a reminder, this is for the year 2021 so that we can get a full scope. And I have my trusty iPad here so that I can read off the figures that you are seeing on screen in case you are visually impaired. So we're going to start with Blood Like Fate. So Blood Like Fate is my second novel, coming out August 9th of 2022 of this year. And so I worked on that quite a bit. So you can see the little graph over here. So on January, I worked on it for 28 days, February for 26 days, in April for 12 days, in May for 7 days, in June for 10 days, in July for 11 days, in August for 6 days, and in November for 4 days. So any months I didn't work on it during those months. For a total of 104 days of working on Blood Like Fate, which when you think about it in the whole scheme of the year, kind of almost a third of the year spent working on Blood Like Fate. which to me makes sense. I think it's a combination of things. I think for one, the very first edit that I had done in the beginning of the year, I thought that edit would take me a month. It took me a full 2 months because I was making some major changes. So it's not a spoiler for Blood Like Fate, but as a kind of note for Blood Like Fate, which is the sequel to Blood Like Magic, which is about a family of black witches living in a near future Toronto. So I had a character in Blood Like Fate who was a pretty major character, and I cut them out and I fixed it. So that took a lot of work. It took a lot of work, and then I decided on all of these twists that like were so unnecessary. And I decided on a bunch of them because I'm obsessed with twists, and I put those in, and it just like, it took a lot of time. And so that makes sense to me that these Blood Like Fate edits were so extensive. And then the next one is 6 Days and 5 Nights. So this is my first attempt at a adult horror novel. So I worked on this for 14 days in March, 30 days in April, 14 days in May, 5 days in June, for a total of 63 days. This one is a big sigh because I ended up dropping this project. This was the only project I dropped in 2021. So I spent 63 days working on this. I spent like basically, like 2 months basically. And it makes sense for April. I was doing Camp Nano and I was working on this project, so I did it for the whole 30 days. So yeah, I spent a good chunk of time working on 6 Days and 5 Nights, RIP, but maybe I'll return to it someday, who knows. The next project is The Newlyweds. This is my second attempt at an adult horror. It ended up being an adult horror thriller. And so this is the one that I kept, that I stuck with, and I worked on it for... accidentally turned off my iPad. There we go. 9 days in June, 10 days in July, 3 days in August, 5 days in September, 5 days in October, 15 days in November, for a total of 47 days. So you may notice I actually spent less time on this than I spent on my first attempt at an adult horror. And this is because I was really impatient after my first attempt at an adult horror. And so most of the time that is tracked in this was for me spending time on plotting this project and on revising this project. The actual writing of this, I actually wrote this book in 8 days. You can check out that vlog over here if you're interested to check out my vlog of me writing a book in 8 days, because I was so impatient. So it makes sense to me that this has a smaller day count. The next project is Bear Hunt. So this is my proposed 2024 novel. Hasn't been confirmed yet, so I proposed that one to my publisher. And so I worked on it for 5 days in July and 2 days in December for a total of 7 days. This makes sense because I had done the proposal in 2020. So in 2021, I was just making edits to the proposal. So I made edits to it once before we submitted it to my publisher. Well, not once, I'd made edits before, but I made the final edits before we submitted it to my publisher. And then after getting some feedback from my publisher, I then made further edits to it before submitting it, which it's a proposal. So it's a synopsis and the first 3 chapters, and in my process of editing, I wasn't really editing the pages, so I wasn't really editing the chapters. I was more so editing the synopsis, and so it didn't take as much time. And then next is the Blood Like Magic spin-off. So I had an idea for a spin-off of my debut novel, Blood Like Magic, and I was working on that. So I worked for 5 days in August, 5 days in September, for a total of 10 days. So it seems like I didn't work on this project very much at all, but I actually did a lot of research. So I'm still in the researching phase for that project. So I was reading a lot of books. So I read like 5 books as research for this project. And I don't time track like on my project timeline where I make note of working on projects, I don't make note of me like reading books for projects. I do have a separate like book tracker where I do actually make note of books that I'm reading and how much time I take reading them, but I didn't feel like looking at that. So, but I read 5 books. So I spent like, you know, a good couple months in that way. It just wasn't really tracked because it's kind of a more adjacent way of working on this project versus me like setting aside time. So I wasn't like writing out anything. I was just doing research. So this actually isn't that reflective of how much time I worked on this project, but we'll leave it. And then finally, Butcherbirds, which is my 2023 novel. The title will be changing, but I am not revealing it yet. So that one I worked on for 10 days in October, 15 days in November, and 2 days in December for a total of 27 days. So yes, this also makes sense. You'll notice that in December I was purposely trying to take the whole month off. And so I worked on like no projects, and the projects that I did work on, I worked on very little because I was trying not to do any work in December. So Butcherbirds, I didn't get my edits for it until October. So that's why I only started working on it then. And then I was just following my regular editing schedule. This is usually the regular amount of time that I will work on things. I will say a note also, I'm going to show the projects all together on screen now so that you can see what it looks like all together if you're wanting to see, you know, how things stack up. It's going to show a day amount that's larger than like, you know, the 31 maximum days in a month. This is because in some months I worked on multiple projects at once, so they were overlapping on certain days. So that's why the chart looks like that, if you were wanting to see that. But yeah, I worked on, it's clear from this chart, but I worked on Blood Like Fate the most. I spent the most days on it. And yeah, it's interesting. And from July 5th onwards is when I adopted a 5-day work schedule. So I was working from Monday to Friday and not working on weekends anymore. And so that's kind of interesting because I was like, oh, maybe I'll see like a kind of trending down of days spent working as the months go on. But that's also something to note if that is interesting to you. So yeah, that was all the time I spent on projects. And now the time I spent on author-related activities. I thought it would be cool to include this because I do think it's interesting to see these sorts of stats as well, because there are all these other things that you can be doing as an author that aren't the writing that can like play into things. So things like events, which is part of your promotion and your marketing. So in events, I've included things like podcast interviews, if I was on panels for things, if I was on, you know, panels for events. I've also included if I did, you know, a written interview for a publication, if I did like a guest post for a publication, things like that, because to me that still took up my time. So most of these activities in events would have only been like, you know, an hour or 2 hours in length of time, but I'm doing it in days because that's how I've done everything else. So it seems good to be consistent. So for events, I spent 59 days doing events, which when I saw that number, like that felt so wild to me because it didn't feel like I did 59 events. But again, this is including things like podcasts, which I did sign up for like a good amount of podcasts because I was like, oh, that's, you know, pretty simple to do. I just come and I talk. And then written interviews, so interviews for blogs and things like that for websites or publications. All of those were things that I would kind of just like do in a day. So I would like write it one day and then like the next day I would usually edit it and then I'd send it off. And those I could do multiples of those at once. And most of these days were concentrated in June, which is when Blood Like Magic came out. And so I was doing the most promotion during that time. Instagram lives, things like that as well. My launch events. So yeah, it ended up being 59 days worth of events. So there you go. And then mentorship. So I participated in AMM and I did a mentorship for that. And so that was 25 days spent there. So spent, reading over submissions and then reading over my mentees' materials and submissions. So yeah, that was 25 days altogether committed to the mentorship. And then I did a workshop and that was 15 days. So I spent 2 weeks prepping for that workshop, and then of course I had the day of doing the workshop, so that ended up being the 15 days. And I believe at that time I did like work over weekends, I believe I worked over weekends. If I didn't work over weekends, then it's 11 days. But I'm pretty sure I worked over the weekend. So that was that time commitment. But yeah, I just thought that would be interesting to look at because these are kind of things that do take up time when you are an author, because these are things that are part of promotion or they're adjacent author things that relate to writing and do you spend time on them. So they still count. And I know for some authors, the amount of time spent on events can be so high that it interferes with writing. And so I also think it's kind of interesting to look at it in that way, because I know for some authors, the amount of events they have is huge. And if you look at it in comparison to writing, you kind of realize how much time, how much of a time commitment that is as well. Some overall stats. So overall, excusing that sometimes I did work on multiple projects at once, though I didn't do that often. I spent 258 out of 365 days of 2021 writing. So 71% of my year writing. And the other 30% doing whatever. Some of that time spent on YouTube, clearly. Some of that time spent on, the promotion things that I mentioned. And a bunch of that time, I'm sure, spent reading. In 2021, I read 125 books, which I was really, really happy about. And I really enjoyed being able to get so much reading done. So that was a great balance for me. So even though this wasn't a 50-50 split, I feel like last year in 2021, that was a really good balance for me of writing and promotion and everything. I didn't often feel overwhelmed. November was hard. November was really stacked. So that was a difficult month. Hence why I wanted to take the whole of December off after. But overall, it was pretty good. And I worked on 6 projects during 2021. I dropped 1. So all of that writing was mostly in between stages because none of those projects were completed. I still have Blood Like Fate edits going on in 2022. Butcherbirds edits are still happening. Other things are still happening. And I think it would be really easy to be wow, so I wrote a bunch but completed nothing. But honestly, it takes a long process to get to completion, which to me, completion is not, well, there is a completion in drafting a project. So I technically drafted 2 books during that time, but to me, completion is the book is done. The publisher, I've done all the publisher edits, it's finished. That's total completion. And that takes a long time to get to. So I'm totally fine with that. And yeah, I think my time was best managed when I switched to a 5-day work week. That was really helpful. I think I was resisting the 5-day work week because I was that's what the man wants you to do Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. But it actually worked out really well. And often I wasn't working 9 to 5. Some days I legit worked 9 to 10. I spent it was an hour. And I was done because I just wrote at a faster speed, or I just didn't have that many edits to do. And so, it didn't take up a huge amount of time or my day. But I liked it because it forced me to take breaks on the weekend, which ended up being a really good recharger for me, so that when I came back to Monday, I was really ready and raring to go. And it was really helpful. And I didn't feel as exhausted. I feel in those earlier months before I switched to that, I would be working on a project every single day. And I feel for Blood Like Fate, that for those first 2 months of the year, I was working on that project every single day, and it was like very tiring. And so I think switching to that 5-day work week schedule ended up helping me a lot. And yeah, it was really good. There's the dog. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!